the world's #1 podcasting platform for African stories.
Happy Africa Podcast Day 2024. I'm excited to have this panel with some of my favorite people in South Africa, some of the most exciting and innovative people behind the South African Podcasting Guild. Today, we're going to discuss the importance to the ecosystem. But before we get into that, I'd love for my panelists to introduce themselves. John, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thanks very much for having us, Molly. My name's Jonathan Warncke. I live in Cape Town, South Africa, and I'm the MD of the South African Podcasters Guild, or the SAPG as we like to call it, to keep things short.
I'm Paulo Dias. So I am in Johannesburg of South Africa, not as glamorous as Cape Town. And my role in the Podcasters Guild is to look after industry relations. So basically manage our relationships with media owners, media partners, ad agencies, and kind of grow us on that level.
Amazing. So guys, as you're listening, obviously there's going to be gems being dropped. So make sure that you're taking notes. We'll make sure that we share contact information for you to reach out to the SAPG or to our esteemed panelists after this conversation. But before we get into the meat and potatoes, obviously we're celebrating a really exciting day for podcasters on the continent, Africa Podcast Day. And I'm curious to both of you, John and Paulo, what does that mean to you? Have you guys ever engaged with Africa Podcast Day, or what do you think it means for the ecosystem here on the continent?
I think from my point of view, that was my first kind of introduction into broader the APVA and Afripods in what you've been doing in the Africa Podcast Day over the years, and kind of going, oh, I didn't even know there was a thing. And when you sit there, and I think there's kind of like this, we sit here in South Africa and go, we're the leaders in everything. And then when you get quite humbled when you see what's been happening on the rest of the continent and we weren't part of the party. And we're like, oh no, we got to do something to get part of this. And, kind of the developments and the growth and kind of the sophistication of the rest of the African podcast market is very, like I said, it's humbling to us to go, wow, we got some steps to make up here because very interesting things are happening up there.
Absolutely. And John, anything that you think about Africa Podcast Day before we get into this combo?
Well, I'm relatively new to the landscape myself. I mean, Paulo has been kind of, he's had a career in radio and audio for quite a long time. Mine comes from more of an advertising background, and I started getting into podcasting in 2019. So Africa Podcasting Day only came onto my radar last year when I first met you and became aware of Afripods and the APVA and everyone else, basically. So this will be my proper first African Podcasting Day, and I'm looking forward to kind of activating it with the SAPG and you guys and everyone else.
Well, we're excited to have you, and happy Africa Podcast Day to the both of you, as well as all of our listeners. I'm sure you guys cannot wait to get into the meat of this conversation, which is really about the South Africa Podcasting Guild and its importance to the ecosystem. So as we kind of get right into it, I'm curious, and maybe John, you could lead with this, but how did the idea of the SAPG come about?
So before I pass over to Paulo, because we've, preparation is very important. So before we had this chat, we kind of divided up the questions as to who's going to take the lead in answering them. And this is Paulo's one. But I will say, it's not a problem, but it is kind of an important point for the brand purposes that we're the South African Podcasters Guild, not podcasting, which is, no issue there. But I always try to keep that in mind, because every time we're trying to think of like, what's the initiative, what's the event, what's the content we're making, it's got to be focused on the podcasters. It's like the people in the members are what's important, and we're a member-driven organization. But enough of that. Paulo, take it away, bro.
So I think Jonathan just showed there that the value he's brought in to any initiative we're doing, and the idea came around having multiple conversations with multiple podcasters, and everybody having this idea of going, we should get together, we should talk about this, we should have a meeting, we should have a WhatsApp group. And I was having this conversation with multiple podcasters, and the main things were that everyone felt very alone, because I think that's the thing with podcasting. It is mostly you do it in isolation, you speak to yourself in a room, and you put out a show and you get one listen and you go, why am I doing this? And I was having these conversations with loads of people that were all going through the same thing and going, geez, there are so many connections that we can start making. And I had multiple conversations. And one of them, the early start of it was with Spike Ballantyne. And he and I was sitting at a coffee shop and we're like, we should do this and get some guys in the room, and didn't really manifest. And then we had an event down in Cape Town, of which was the first time I'd formally met Jonathan. And then things just lit, because it was like, this is real, this is legit. In my mind, it was a pizza and beer type organization where Jonathan just took it to a whole different level and formalized it in the way that I think has really shown the value to members. I think if you're a beer and pizza organization, you're going to burn out very quickly, because people are going to go, well, why am I part of this? But the authenticity and the box ticking, and I use that in the most flattering way with Jonathan, that have gone, this is a real proper organization that looks after its members. This is not just a jolly to sit around and talk about microphones. And there's part of that as well. But it's about going, we are an organization that wants to look after the independent podcasters, show them structure, show them support, show them value, show them an end game into commercialization, because I think to a point, everybody's looking towards that. And by the way we've started, I think people have looked at it, certainly when, I take it out to the industry, that they're going, wow, this is real and legit, and it looks after its members. And if it looks after its members, and its members are of the caliber that we've attracted so far, then this becomes a very viable body for us to align with when we want to pursue podcasting from a branding, commercialization, or messaging point of view.
Wow. I mean, leaning into structure and creating spaces that create value and ultimately solve problems for the community members are so important. And there's a lot that you can take from what you just said, Paulo. Obviously, it's a really big bite for the ecosystem. It's a big bite for South Africa. But I'm curious to both of you then, why start it now? And what made you, outside of understanding that this is something that could be valuable, like what made it so important to build this structure in this exact moment? What were you guys seeing happening?
It's that old consultant line, there's nothing as strong as an idea whose time has come. And it really did feel like that. It just felt like Jonathan mentioned, I've been involved with podcasting since it was even called podcasting, and just watching the media landscape, the industry landscape, just seeing that it just felt like the right time, the right people were there, the level of sophistication in terms of content was there, the level of understanding within both the ad market and the listenership was there. Because I think there have been good podcasters and there have been brands willing to spend, but I don't think the listeners have quite been there. And then you start seeing the swell of listening. You start seeing people's media habits includes podcasting. You start seeing the time spent with various things is podcasting. Podcasting was no longer a thing people heard of, but it was a thing that they actively did. And it's that dinner table litmus test. Hey, I do podcasts. Hey, have you heard this podcast? And when people start recommending podcasts to you, and kind of like when your parents understand what a podcast is, that's when you know I've done something and it's ready. So it just, like, was there one moment? No, but it just felt that there was just this perfect union of the people, the industry, the desire, the market, the cool factor. And it just felt it was, and the right people coming together, to be honest, from our side, that it was like, right, this is the time we do it.
That is quite an equation. In a lot of ways, when you're building something new and something that hasn't been done before, I think timing might be one of the most critical pieces of the equation. You could have the best idea, but if it's not at the right time, people aren't receptive to it. And to your point, and just echoing what you're saying, the podcasting landscape and ecosystem has grown tremendously. It's incredibly robust in South Africa. The research that's coming out of South Africa is super exciting. And I think a organizing body like SAPG is at exactly the right time with exactly what it needs in order to thrive and plant roots to ultimately grow as the medium grows in South Africa specifically. I'm curious, getting into a little bit more of the underbelly of SAPG. What exactly are you guys seeing in terms of growth? and interest since it started? And what's that reception look like in terms of members, in terms of media, and in terms of, organization, I guess?
Well, I think Paulo can speak pretty well to obviously the industry stuff, but he's been putting out his feelers and communicating with people, and there's been a great response from the industry. We've had a lot of kind of PR coverage and a lot of positive support on that side, which is great. On the nuts and bolts stuff, though, sapg.co.za is our homepage, and all the information and the ability to join is there. And through that page, we've got about 150 signups for kind of information and newsletters and updates and all that. And then on the actual kind of contact submission, join us form, we're at about 88 members. So that's since November the 2nd, 2023. So we're hoping to get to 100 members in 100 days, which I'm really proud of everyone who's been involved in it and how it's gone so far. People are definitely kind of feeling that the time is right. And having spoken to some colleagues in America at the Podcast Academy and various other shows, we've done some kind of pre-interviews with them. That rate to get up to kind of 88 members in just over 3 months is a great response. So we're really excited about it. We're hoping that within, our moonshot number is 1,000 members within the first year. And because it's a member-powered organization, it's a community-powered organization, a lot of our initiatives are reliant on members talking to each other and supporting each other, like the festival that we're planning on throwing in November, like the first South African Podcasting Awards that we'll also be throwing in November. So very kind of buoyed by that initial response.
That's incredible. And I mean, like, this leads me into just understanding how, and this really is important to kind of understand the amount of work that you guys have done. So how long did it take from inception of idea of SAPG to today at 88 members? And was it 6 months, 12 months, 2 years? How long did that take?
What's nice is that's a memorable number for us because it's exactly 3 months to the day when I reached out to everyone and said, hey, everyone's saying we should have an organization. How about this? And then when everyone got on board, from that day, it took exactly 3 months to launch the website and launch the SAPG. And now since November 2nd, it's taken another, don't do maths, but another 90-ish days. So we're about 6 months into the process. That's how long it's taken. But that was working at a pretty good clip.
I mean, honestly, that type of organization with multiple people having ideas and how to do it right or what needs to be included. Kudos to you guys, kudos to the team, kudos to the board, and kudos to your members ultimately, validating this concept and showing the need for it. I want to get into some of the challenges that might have been experienced from conception of idea to present day, if you experienced any. I mean, moving at the speed that you guys moved, I'm curious how you navigated those challenges or problems as they came up.
So I go to Jonathan's Jonathan's points about expediency, and back to what I said earlier, it was just the right time. I mean, to move that quickly is kind of unheard of in a lot of things, but it just meant that we had the right people around us. The timing was right, and it just felt natural, and when Jonathan talks to the members, we're going from like really independent small shows to Nicole Engelbrecht, who is South Africa's the queen of podcasting, and she's a member. So we've really got this diverse range of members within the group. In terms of, and it happened so quickly because of Jonathan. And I really have to take time because I don't think I say it often enough about how quickly he legitimized everything. It was just within reach out, we're doing this. I think what was very disciplined is we set ourselves a date because we can procrastinate and we can wait for perfect and we can wait for the best thing. And we just said, look, we've got to put a stake down and aim for a date, or else we're never going to launch it. And I think that was quite important for us to do because it really laser focused. And then Jonathan, there were lawyers involved and got us properly registered, and we're legit. And now when you go to the industry, you go, they look at it and they go, wow, this is a proper body. This isn't just a group of guys, just having fun. In terms of challenges, we've been blessed so far without having hit our head against anything. There has been wonderful support from, online publications that cover the media. They have really given us a lot of inventory. There's some nice, exciting projects and holdings that are going to be kicking in the next few months to give us a constant presence. The big media owners in terms of radio stations have been really receptive to what we're doing. The media agencies, brands are really excited about this. I think where we have hit kind of like, not any blocks, but kind of any feedback was the bigger independent podcasts who have kind of been doing it on their own for a while, felt that there's nothing we could add to them, and probably rightly so. They've kind of been down the road and didn't really see any value, and that's their decision. And then I think also we had
That'll change.
well, it will change, because I also think a lot of people who look into it, who've kind of approached, and are guys who only see this as a money-making entity. So people who look at it and go, no, I've got a production studio and I make podcasts for other people and I charge them for that. If I'm in a body that exposes me to other people like this, I'm going to lose my clients. I'm going to lose my edge. I'm going to be in bed with the competition, of which it kind of goes, that's your choice and you're 100% to feel that way. But it kind of goes, it's a bit of a lack of foresight of the bigger picture, in that if everyone's podcast grows, you by, nature will grow. But we've also had a very strict no douchebag policy. It kind of like, we are good people. We want to help. There are no secrets. There are no ringed fences. There is no hierarchy. It's everybody's equal and everybody's going to support each other. And I think from the outside, people who have seen that and it doesn't fit with them, they won't gravitate towards it. So we've also been like, we don't want to chase any member away, but we're also we just want to hang out with cool people, basically. So I think that's really prevented us from like having too many headaches.
If I may just add on to what Paulo said, and I have to try and pick out challenges, right? And to be honest, we kind of avoided these challenges by luck. But number one being that, we registered as a non-profit company. So with a little bit of help from Aton Stern and Legalese, who are our kind of legal partners, they've taken us on as a pro bono client for the registration of the company and all that. And I think by doing that, it created a general sense of trust amongst the community that no one's trying to make a quick buck here. Paulo's making no money out of this. I'm making no money out of this. Like, no one on the board is being paid until, I think I've said like the first 6 months or the first year or whatever it is, not even for their time. So therefore, we're not trying to rip anyone off, essentially. So I think that made it easier to attract members, because they didn't feel like someone was trying to, build their own little scam. And then I think we got lucky in, we'll chat a little bit later about how the community is based, how it communicates with each other. We're using WhatsApp communities right now, which is free. And I think that's been an element of success as well. But yeah, overall, we've managed to so far sidestep things. Not to say that we won't reach them in the future. I'm sure there will be a lot of challenges coming up.
I'm glad you brought up WhatsApp, because that was actually something I was going to ask about, and how WhatsApp communities has worked for you guys. But ultimately, why did you guys decide on WhatsApp community to host all of your members' conversations, as opposed to a native platform or a social media platform?
In the 3-month process of coming up with the various structures and systems for the guild, we looked at Mighty Networks. We looked at Circle, which are two kind of community platforms, and they're not cheap. They have a lot of flexibility, a lot of power. But then I kind of, funny enough, I did an interview, and here's another power of podcasting, is that you can learn so much from people when you interview them. And I interviewed an author who was building her own community over in England, and she had started with Mighty, I think. And she was actually considering switching over to WhatsApp communities, simply for the fact that everyone has the app. Like, getting someone to download an external app, go into it, and take part in a community is very difficult. And you need to be adding massive value before you try that. So we thought we wouldn't try. We'd do it in WhatsApp, which everyone's already in. If you don't like the spam, you can mute the group. That's fine. No one so far has complained saying, oh, guys, like, this is really too much. So they're taking responsibility for their own kind of consumption. And I think what that's resulted in is a really active community that can respond immediately without having to, I need to go and check the Mighty app and communicate, So yeah, I think the immediacy and the lack of friction is what's given us a major bonus in the community.
I mean, community media is, in my opinion, one of the most exciting growth trajectories in tech globally. And obviously being on the continent, community is so innately understood by people. So I think leaning into the path of least resistance, which is what it sounds like you're saying with WhatsApp, is really
I'm
smart.
very lazy.
You know, they say also lazy people come up with the best solutions. So I've heard it
Totally.
myself. It's easy and it makes things just flow in a way where you can identify the problems and solve those rather than create problems for yourself that later you'll have to solve. So kudos to you guys. And I'm curious because obviously you guys had mentioned earlier a little bit about the fact that this governing body not only legitimizes podcasting in South Africa, but it also shows that there's structure, there's people that care, there's an organization behind it. And I'm curious for those listeners who may be in other countries, whether it's Zimbabwe or Malawi or Nigeria or Kenya, I'm curious what you would tell podcasters or people in the business of podcasting in those countries listening who want to create the same type of network or community or organization where they are?
Well, we only have kind of a sample size of one, and it's working for us. So I'm more than happy to, if anyone wants to ask us about how we do things, I'm more than happy to share all the information. And maybe someday we'll create a piece of content for our podcasts about how to create a podcasting community for yourself. But I guess the aforementioned point about structuring as a nonprofit, I think, has helped. I would say that finding the minimum viable product, using WhatsApp community for the interactions. We're using Squarespace for the website, which is not a cheap platform. There are probably cheaper options, but I tend to handle the website, and I'm a writer, not an art director, and it's a very intuitive kind of layout for me, right? It uses blocks and pre-made things and all that, which I like. I think the path to funding that kind of community is going to be different in every country. In our case, we're aiming to be member funded completely through memberships. The technical challenge of plugging payment plans or payment systems into your website and then getting people to use them and then opening a bank account and all that kind of thing. Those were, to go back to challenges, that was a mission, right? And we're still not 100% there when it comes to having pay gates and all that kind of thing. For now, we're mostly free, and people who want to contribute can. So we have a small number of people who are paying 100 Rand every month to support the guild. Paulo's company, Ultimate Media, came to the table with a great financial donation, which is essentially has kept us afloat for the first 3 months. So anyone building a community, if you can find a benefactor, a sponsor to help you pay those hard costs, that tech stack that you have to kind of connect everyone, then that's awesome. I think it'll be much harder if we just had zero money and then had to say this is going to be member funded before you have a community, right? So that advantage of some kind of seed money has been a major one, and hopefully by the time it runs out, we'll be fully member funded.
I think over and above, I mean, that's the very, here's the working guide to how to do it. But I think more than the community is a thing. So it's like there are so many barriers, and I'm sure you can see them. I think the first thing starts with reaching out to somebody who you think has the same idea as you. Because if you're in a podcast community, wherever you are, other people are thinking what you're thinking, and just start by reaching out to them, and it will become what you need it to become. And I think it starts with actually just being vulnerable and putting out there and going, I'm tired of doing this alone, or why am I doing this alone? Are there others like me? And I think that before anything else is going to be the spark, because all of us sat for 2 to 3 years before thinking the same and not having the conversation. And then everything just flowed from there when the right people came together.
Yeah, I would say the WhatsApp group, even if you've got nothing else, start a WhatsApp group with podcasters, ask them to invite other people in, and it'll develop from there.
So for those who are listening, use what you got, leverage your immediate community, people who think like you, people who do the same things as you, and use WhatsApp. It's free. People are already on it, and see where you can grow from there before you create a massive entity, not knowing what people want. Am I succinct in that recap, guys? Thank you.
Nailed it.
And, there's something that you had mentioned a little bit earlier, Paulo, was about done being better than perfect, right? Like transparency is one of the foundational values, if I understood correctly, of SAPG. And I'm curious in terms of the actual organization of this community, how many people are participating in your board, or how many people are involved in the immediate decision makers as opposed to members, or what are the tiers or buckets that you could participate in as a member of SAPG? Might be a better way to ask that.
Yeah, there are 3 unpaid directors of the board, and then you need, in South Africa, for a non-profit company, you need 3 directors to start that, right? So we just went for the minimum number, and then we will grow and we will iterate as we go along as the responsibilities multiply. There was a core group of about 20 podcasters who were involved in all the back and forth of, let's try this and what about this and all that kind of brainstorming. And now that we have launched, and 3 months later, as I said, we're heading towards 100 members. We're almost at 90. And in the actual WhatsApp community, there were about 50 active members chatting. So some people did sign up to be guild members, but they're not interacting on the WhatsApp community group yet. I'm trying to hunt them and get them to like come over and chat. But I think it is the kind of people who just, I don't do groups, or it's too much spam, or whatever it might be. So we will reach out through the newsletter signups to re-incentivize that and try and get people, because I really think that the power of a community is people talking to each other, not us talking to them.
Okay, that's poignant. And going back a little bit in terms of, you had received this initial donation of capital that's helping fund you guys, and hopefully the business will become sustainable and be able to grow. What do membership fees look like for people who are joining? Are there any free tiers available, or do they all start at a paid level? How does that work?
There will always be a free tier, and that'll be the tier for people who haven't started their shows yet, students, people who don't have the resources. We don't want to exclude anyone who needs help starting a show or learning more about how to make a podcast. The paid tier right now sits at, we arbitrarily pegged it at 100 Rand a month, which is, I'm not sure in various countries what all that translates to. In dollars, it's $5-ish, I think, which, we pegged it at what is a cheap software as a service that people will subscribe to on a monthly basis, and what kind of value do they get out of it. The SAPG in its starting position is around that. So let's go for 100 Rand a month. So that tier, although we haven't yet gated anything, when we eventually get there, that tier will give members who pay the ability to plug into our monetization thing. Paulo, do you want to chat about that shortly? And also, I think the ability to talk to other professional podcast producers a little bit more. So there will be kind of like a pro section for people who are either producing for other people or for themselves to monetize. And that's a level above just being a hobbyist. That's investing in your craft, investing in your career. So we feel like that is worth an investment in the guild. And then, there might be later more expensive tiers for goodness knows what networking services or something. But for now, it's just 2. It's just, well, right now, it's still basically everyone. And we call it a pay as you want or pay if you can system. But Paulo, maybe it's a good time to chat about, I think the main benefit of being a pro member per se would be that plugging into the monetization scheme.
And that's an inevitable next. So I think you explained it quite well. I think it's, if you come into the paid tier, it's like Jono says, it's not about us making money out of it. It's about giving you value and access to things that you as an individual podcaster may not necessarily have. So is that down the line software? Is that down the line a professional way to look after your commercialization? Is that you're able to hand off your commercialization to somebody to look after on your behalf, to pitch on your behalf, to market on your behalf? It will give you access to courses and training material down the line. So it's just about going, if you're a podcaster within South Africa and you want access to information, come to the guild first, and you'll find something here. And rather take it from guys who've gone through, bumped their heads, learned the hard way, and kind of going to save you time, and you can't, skip ahead to that part of your journey.
Thank you. I'm glad you kind of got into that a little bit, because I'm very curious about what monetization looks like, not just from, an organizational perspective in terms of how you're going to use that money, where is it going to go, how does it get reinvested, but also how do you guys help as a community podcasters make money? Because that is the question I get every day. Can we make money? Are there advertising opportunities? How much do we charge? And I'm hopeful, without really knowing, that a space like this would allow those type of conversations to freely happen, right? So that people can, how do people get, is the guild a place where people can ask questions if they're a novice, or is the guild a place that just, protects the podcasters as a unit externally, so the guild can show up and protect its members? Or is it more so, hey, I need support here, what do I do, what type of mic, where can I get that? Have you guys thought about how you might want to engage in that capacity?
It's a bit of all of those. So let me talk to the commercialization side, because that's what everyone's interested in, right? Predominantly, whether you are making money directly for your podcast or you're using your podcast as a business card to make money. That's ultimately what I'd say most people are kind of looking for, because we're investing time into it. But I think it's got to be give and take. And I think the grand dream of the guild went like this. It goes, right, if you want to make yourself a viable media entity and a viable advertising product, you need to give certain things to the ad industry and to marketers. Now, one of the first things is you need to be broadcast quality. So broadcast quality comes the microphone conversation, the studio time conversation. Should I invest in cameras? Do I go into YouTube? So it goes, you've got to create a product that is worth spending money on, right? And that's one thing that's really surprised me pretty much all of our guild members are producing broadcast quality content, right? Some are already there, some are on their way there, but the quality has absolutely blown me away that you can take this anywhere. The next thing is to go, okay, you've produced broadcast quality, but now are you accountable in multiple ways? So there's audit trails, there's procurement process, there's all that stuff that comes in now when you need to work with an advertiser, especially at scale and especially with big advertisers. So it goes, when I place an ad with you, will you flight it? Is your audience who you say your audience is? So when you say you've got X amount of listens or views, who accounts for that? How do I know that exists there? So it goes, okay, that's got to be part of it. Afterwards, can I get a campaign report? Can you show me what happened? Can you show me the results? Can you show me how this performed according to our predefined metrics, right? So that's the next part of it. And then there's an accountability issue. So podcasting needs to be a safe space. In South Africa, our most successful and popular podcasters are also controversial podcasters. And that's worked for them, but it's not going to work for everybody. So if you are a podcaster who wants to go down that road, or if you're a podcaster that has decided to go down that road and something needs to be said or somebody needs to say something against you, where do they go? Now, who protects the listeners, from podcasters who do want to go renegade? And I think that's kind of where we sit to go, if you want to make money from your podcast, you need to act like a grown-up. And I think members of the guild who can safely say, look, you want to advertise on podcasts, you need these criteria to be met. Guild members meet those criteria. We don't censor, we don't say run this, don't run that, but we just say, listen, you're a guild member, that comes with things. If you want to earn through our partners and through our networks and the way we see it, you need to kind of play ball on this side. And that's for people to decide, and there'll be certain things they want to, certain things not. But I think the thing is, and this is the conversation I was having mostly with the ad industry, if I advertise on a podcast, how do I know my brand is protected? And it goes, well, if they come with the stamp of the South African Podcast Guild, you are protected, because everything from what does the listener look like to brand safety is kind of a guarantee from Podcast Guild members.
Would you consider the Podcasting Guild like a network then?
Yeah.
Or do you see it as a community?
It's, that's where it gets complicated. And that's a problem that we hope to solve, because then it goes, well, now you're a business. Because once you're a network, now you're monetizing. So I think for now it's a community. I think it's going to get to that point quicker than we anticipate and we expect. And then that's going to be a great problem for us to solve, because it means we've done a lot of good things. It means we've got members on traction. It means we're attracting advertisers. It means we have to make difficult decisions and decide, well, what do we do now? But for now, I'd say it's a community, but there is that end game somewhere along the line.
I think that there's a really, really exciting plethora of spaces that SAPG could go, right? I mean, for me, when I was listening to you talk, obviously the first thing that came to mind was, oh, this could eventually become a network. And it sounds like that's something that could potentially have been discussed before, but you do have to crawl before you run, before you jump, before you sprint. And if we're focusing at where we are right now, which is frankly 6 months in, which is incredibly impressive, we're at a space where the community is growing and ultimately telling you what they want and what they need. So I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but it's amazing to see that you guys are starting to forecast in a way that shows that this has longevity, this has legs, this has serious credibility. And even mentioning earlier in this chat, right now having 88 members, but your moonshot target being 1,000, it lends me to think of questions that, even myself, I'm not sure if I have the answers to, which is primarily around market size, right? Like if you have why did 1,000 numbers become, or 1,000 members become that moonshot number? Does it feel attainable? Does it feel like, there are this many podcasters in South Africa? Or how do you make sure that you're quantifying this in a way that feels responsible for growth? Because eventually you'll measure through money in, right? Money out, advertising. But for now, it feels kind of like the wild, wild west in podcasting across the continent from what I see. So if you could shed light on that, that is a direct hit question, very helpful for me. How do you quantify the market? Or is this just off of what everyone thinks?
Well, look, initially, funnily enough, it was, I think I might have pulled the number out of the air, more or less. But we have a kind of a distinct advantage in our relationship with iono.fm. And Francois Retief over there, he's got access to a massive trove of data because they host over 3,500 South African podcasts, or channels at least. Some of them are online radio. They're not all pure podcasts. But with 3,500, I thought we can get a third of that, surely. Like we're asking is for under a third of 3,500 channels. And that's only Iono, because there's lots of South African podcasts that are hosted on Buzzsprout or Podbean or anything else. So, I mean, and looking at the numbers that we have access to, like the, what's the name of that study, Paulo?
Edison Dial report?
The Edison Dial, yeah.
Right. I mean, just looking at those numbers, I think it is, it's in the realm of possibility. It is a moonshot. And another massive advantage, by the way, and a tip is that if you run a nonprofit organization, Google will give you an incredible media spend budget for advertising your community, right? So it's Google AdWords. I think it's $10,000 a month. And for $10,000 a month, I can own a keyword, in South Africa. So we're still tuning those ad sets to so when people search how to podcast or what equipment do I need for a podcast, then the SAPG pops up. So that is another major benefit, because organic reach when it comes to marketing is difficult and pretty terrible, actually, and anyone who has a podcast will tell you that. But once you get a little bit of paid media to promote yourself on Meta, on Google, on other people's podcasts, then you've got a little bit more of a chance for traction. So yeah, 1,000 people. I think one thing that we all agree on is that the real space to grow in South Africa is in multi-language podcasts, Xhosa, Zulu, Afrikaans, and all the other official languages we have. Like, we can't just be an English-speaking podcast community, and there's massive scope for growth there because cell phone data is getting cheaper. People are ready to transition off radio. They're listening and watching all kinds of pretty data-heavy stuff on their phone already, and I think that the time for podcasts now to fully enter the public consciousness is, and thanks to large shows like MacG and Chill and all that. Paulo's got a better point than me.
And no, it's a great point, and I'm glad you did mention it. So I think, Molly, that 1,000, it goes, whenever we bring that number up, it goes, well, eventually you're going to reach a cap. And to the point, we'll reach a cap of English speakers. But I think once we start unlocking multiple language podcasts, Africa's got 11 languages. So once we start unlocking that, I think those numbers start becoming achievable. But more than that, we at one point had the conversation that podcasting should be one of the mediums that storytellers choose. So when you're tired of TikTok and no one is watching your videos anymore, when you're tired of YouTube because you can't be bothered to go through all that camera work anymore, when your blog is not getting, when people aren't paying attention to your social media, but you've got a story to tell, here is a platform that you may not have considered to tell. There's only so long we want to stick a camera in our face, a phone in our face, and do it that way. When you decide to move on, but you still want to carry your story, a podcast is a great avenue. So that's why that number of 1,000 doesn't look unachievable if you start going, we bucket in local languages because we've not even sniffed that. And then we become or make podcasting a storyteller's platform or medium of choice. Then suddenly you're going, okay, now it's achievable.
I mean, I don't think that 1,000 number is unachievable at all. I actually think that the growth opportunity is massive. I think that young people are very excited about the medium. I think people trust sound, and I love seeing an ambitious number like that. But it's exciting to see that there's a little bit of data behind it, because quantifying markets across this continent is really hard. And I only have 2 more questions, so I will make sure to kind of like, end on a great note, let you guys give contact information. But that question was really interesting to me, because as we think about, the growth of podcasting across this continent, we see significant impact in South Africa. So it looks like this wonderful case study of what podcasting could be in some of these other countries on the continent. But I'm curious, with this development of SAPG, how do you think that could potentially play in the growth of podcasting in South Africa or potentially elsewhere on the continent, if you see any correlation?
I think we had the conversation about being focused on South Africa at the moment. I mean, I think it'd be remiss of us to start saying, well, here's the model that can be translated across. Just very much like we often have the conversations internally about going, well, you can't take the model that works in America and works in Europe and come put it here, because our market and our people and everything is just different. So I think in terms of that expanding, into other markets, that will come, and I see it joining up very quickly. For us, APVA and Afripods and the community you guys have built is a beacon for us to kind of go, that is something like what we want to be like. And we hope to achieve that level. And we hope to integrate with what's happening there already, and less so showing what else is happening, but more so learning. Because I always go back to the story of Mozambican podcasters who there was no iTunes or no Apple or no Spotify, and they were sharing their podcasts on Telegram. And it's going, that is why would you even think of doing that? But it's such an ingenious way to grow your market in your market. So, it's more for us looking outwards and keep looking for those things and what's happening there. And kind of going, okay, wow, that's now problem solving, and how can we adopt that for what we're doing?
Just to jump in on that, I think that there's a massive untapped market for audio fiction, for miniseries, whatever you want, spread primarily via WhatsApp, because people share stuff on WhatsApp. They forward things all the time. And it reminds me of, I think in Japan, people started they used SMS as a means of telling a long story. You could receive an SMS of this person's diary. It was a blog, but it's using a channel that is not fit for that purpose, for a different purpose. And then it kind of unlocks a different means of sharing. But of course, it has to be very, very clever, very viral, very niche driven. But that's why, the first thing that I think of when it comes to what people are passionate about, it's sports and soap operas, weirdly. And murder, apparently.
And I think, Molly, is that the research, we are very fortunate. We do get a lot of research, and I think South Africa is the only African market that Edison did actually look at. I do stand corrected, but that's not to say there aren't listeners in other countries. And I think we've seen it in traditional media. There are markets where TV is stronger than South Africa, where radio is stronger than South Africa, but the research isn't there. So not to say the markets aren't there or the listeners aren't there. So that's why I say it's so important to look at what you're doing and adopting to your, how you're doing things, and taking your own metrics out of that and making that the currency, because that's very much what we're doing. I often sit with people and they go, well, what does 500 listens mean? Is that good? Is it bad? Is it the average? Is it, tell us and create the currency. And I think that's very much what we're spearheading. It's not about, sugarcoating or lying or anything. It's about, this is our currency. This is what that means. Yes, that is good. And they go, okay, great. We just need someone to tell us it's good. And then using that and working with that.
Ooh, that was a good one. I have one last question. I promise it's a softball. How can one become a member of the SAPG?
Unfortunately, you have to be South African, number one, or at least living in South Africa. And that's true of the WhatsApp community itself. You can feel free to sign up to the newsletter, which is at sapg.co.za. There's a kind of a keep in touch block there where we'll send news. I still have to knuckle down and write that first newsletter. And then the join the guild section is where there's a contact form and you can join up. And then after joining up, there's an option to become a paid member if you want, if you can. But yeah, essentially, the website is our home. We have 2 podcasts, one which is the second one's about to be launched. The first is just a news report for guild members. The second one will be a stream on how to podcast in South Africa. I think that will be relevant for anyone worth a listen. And then on socials, we're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn, we're on TikTok for our sins, and we're not on X because no thank you. I just got my prejudice with X has just gotten ahead of me there, so we're not going to do that part.
Well, you guys are almost everywhere where anyone could be. So I'm sure for anyone listening here, please make sure to connect with SAPG, check out their website. If you're in South Africa or South African or living in South Africa, please make sure that you sign up and join. It's an exciting and innovative community of like-minded people who are looking to grow the industry. I want to make sure that I save some time for you guys to share how they can contact you. But I want to really, really lean into this last thing that Paulo said. I don't think you could have been more succinct here, but make your metrics your currency. Really learn how to identify your values and figure out how to commercialize that piece of what you're doing, whether that's in an organization, whether that's as an individual podcaster, whether that's as a media company. You really have to understand what your currency is worth, where you are, and make sure that people understand that so that you can lean into your value. But to close on this, please, I guess I'll start with you, John. If you could share how people could contact you, whether it's LinkedIn or otherwise, or your business, please let the listeners know.
Sure. My surname is a nightmare. It's Warncke, spelled with a W. So you could look for me on LinkedIn. Good luck. Otherwise, john@sapg.co.za is how you get hold of me.
I'm also Paulo at sapg.co.za, and then Paulo Dias on LinkedIn. And I'm always, Molly knows, I'm always there to help. Any questions anybody has, podcasting for me, like I say, I got friends who play golf and they play golf badly. So I think I do podcasts like they play golf, but I think I'm better at podcasts than they do golf. But anyway, it's my 100% passion. I love it. So anybody got any questions at any level, I'm always happy to engage.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
guys. It's been such a pleasure to discuss the SAPG, the importance to the ecosystem. And thank you for, painting a full picture, letting us know how important this timing is, letting us know what's so valuable about the people, figuring out where the industry is, and ultimately leveraging all of the assets you guys have as a currency to create value. It's something that so many countries can, look towards as a model to grow themselves, and we're excited to hear how the expansion plans goes. But thank you guys for participating in Africa Podcast Day. It's a pleasure to know you guys, and thank you for sharing your wisdom. I'm Molly. I'm the CEO of Afripods, and have a good one.